In a live broadcast that no one expected to spiral so quickly, late-night host Stephen Colbert confronted former President Donald Trump's legacy head-on, setting off a chain of reactions that left the studio audience completely stunned. What began as a routine interview turned into one of the most emotionally charged moments in recent TV history. By the time Colbert made his final remark, even the crew was left speechless. Make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated on the stories shaking up the political and entertainment worlds. The lights in the studio burned bright as the crowd roared with anticipation. It was a typical night on The Late Show, or so it seemed. Stephen Colbert adjusted his blazer, cracked a smile, and prepared to shift from his usual string of jokes into what many would later call the most intense segment of his career. On the cue cards in front of him were talking points meant to entertain. But in Colbert's mind, something heavier brewed. He had been biting his tongue for months, years even. And tonight, he was done. Why now? What pushed Colbert, a master of satire and sarcasm, into a moment of raw confrontation? Was it the stories coming out of courtrooms? Was it the ever-growing fatigue he sensed from the public? Or was it simply time someone on mainstream television said what others were too careful to articulate? As the show transitioned into its final segment, Colbert leaned into the camera with a stillness that unsettled the room. He placed the cards down, signaling to the crew that he was going off script. The laughter simmered into silence. Then, calmly but firmly, Colbert asked a question that sliced through the air like a blade. At what point does character matter again? The crowd, unsure of what to make of it, grew still. Colbert wasn't joking. His tone sharpened with each word, no longer wrapped in punchlines or sarcasm. He spoke about truth, decency, and leadership, referencing Trump's recent behavior and long-standing controversies. But instead of rattling off headlines or echoing news cycles, he made it personal, aimed not just at Trump, but at those who still refused to question him. Is this the best we can expect from a man who once held the most powerful office in the world? Colbert continued. When someone lies repeatedly, attacks veterans, mocks disabled reporters, and still claims the moral high ground, do we pretend it's just politics as usual? Or do we finally call it what it is? The camera panned across the audience. Some faces were stunned, others nodding. No one was laughing. And then, the moment that ignited everything. Colbert referenced Trump's recent remarks at a rally, a moment where he, according to multiple sources, belittled victims of violence and praised authoritarian tactics abroad. What kind of leader finds admiration in tyranny and scorn for the wounded? He asked, voice cracking slightly, not with emotion but with intensity. Was it brave? Was it reckless? Or was it both? The reaction from the crowd was not what the producers expected. Instead of the usual applause cues and polite laughs, the room filled with murmurs and uneasy glances. Some viewers at home began tweeting instantly, calling it Colbert's career-defining moment. Others accused him of going too far. But in the studio, no one dared interrupt. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled. The teleprompter operator sat frozen. The director whispered into a headset, asking if they should cut to commercial. But Colbert kept going. He brought up the weight of silence, how complicity hides in humor. When we joke too much about corruption, he said, we start to normalize it. Was this still a comedy show? Or had it become something else entirely? Just as he began listing the controversies tied to Trump's name, everything from financial investigations to ethics violations, a sudden voice broke through the tension. It came from the side stage, where a special guest had been scheduled to make a surprise appearance. The producers had not expected him to enter so soon. But enter, he did. Tomi Lahren, originally scheduled for a brief political back-and-forth, appeared early. Her heels clicked on the studio floor like a countdown to detonation. You talk about character, Stephen, she said coolly, but maybe your side should take a long look in the mirror first. The crowd audibly gasped. And just like that, Colbert had a new adversary standing on his stage. Would he back down, or had this confrontation just begun? Colbert did not flinch. As Tomi Lahren stepped into the frame, the tension in the room thickened like fog. The audience, once buzzing with unease, now sat in absolute stillness. Colbert's expression remained measured, but a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes, not at Lahren's presence, but at the boldness of her entrance and the sheer timing of it. Lahren, dressed for battle, stood poised with a microphone in hand. The corners of her mouth curled slightly in what looked more like defiance than a smile. "Stephen," she said, with the air of someone preparing to lecture a freshman debate class, "you want to talk about leadership and character? Maybe we should start with the hypocrisy that has infected your side of the aisle for years." The audience shifted. A few groaned. One person muttered something unintelligible, and another clapped, but quickly stopped. Lahren wasn't backing down, and everyone knew this was no longer a comedy segment. It was turning into a televised reckoning. Colbert, calm but unblinking, didn't reach for his cards or his cue. "You're here early, Tomi," he said with a half-glance toward the producers behind the camera. "I suppose the floor is yours. But if you're going to speak about character, I hope you're prepared to answer for the person you're defending." The studio grew colder by the second. Lahren raised her eyebrows, scanning the audience. "The problem, Stephen, is that people like you live in an echo chamber. You mock conservatives, demonize Trump, and pretend you're standing on moral high ground. But where was your outrage when your own leaders were pushing lies, covering up scandals, and calling millions of Americans deplorable just because they voted differently?" Colbert leaned forward, voice still controlled but edged with steel. "Is that what you believe character is, Tomi? Just a political tool to weaponize against the other side? Because this isn't about policy disagreements. This is about decency, dignity, the kind of leadership that doesn't mock trauma or use fear as a campaign strategy." Lahren smirked. "You mean like your side didn't do during the last election? Please, spare us the lecture." It was the moment everyone watching had been waiting for. The debate had officially turned into a battleground, and while Colbert still sat behind his desk, Lahren now stood inches from the edge of the stage, arms crossed, feet planted. It wasn't a guest appearance anymore. It was a standoff. But then Colbert did something no one expected. He stood up. He slowly rose from his chair, not to loom over her, but to meet her on equal ground. The audience began to stir. A few people stood instinctively, as if anticipating a speech. Colbert's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the silence like a chisel to stone. "You can spin narratives," he said, "and try to distract with false equivalence, but at the end of the day, we're judged by what we tolerate. And if you're still defending a man who belittled a prisoner of war, who bragged about assault, who continues to divide this country with lies, then you've already told us everything we need to know about your definition of character." Lahren narrowed her eyes, then scoffed. "That's rich coming from a guy who gets paid to mock people for laughs." Colbert didn't blink. "I mock power. I mock lies. That's the job. But I will never stand silent in the face of cruelty." Disguised as strength, a hush fell again. Not because of the volume of his words, but the weight behind them. And in that hush, something shifted. Lahren, no longer so steady on her rhetorical feet, glanced toward the offstage producer, a crack in her confidence, barely visible, but unmistakable. "You're turning a talk show into a moral lecture," she said, trying to regain control. "People didn't come here to hear you play hero." Colbert nodded slowly. "Then they might be watching the wrong show tonight." At that moment, an unexpected voice came through the earpiece of one of the crew members, an urgent message from the network. Producers were debating whether to cut to commercial or let it ride. The live broadcast was seconds away from being pulled for breaking every norm of late-night programming. But neither Colbert nor Lahren backed down. They had captured the attention of millions, and neither one would give an inch. Then, just as the energy reached a boiling point, Colbert turned to the camera. "Let the audience decide," he said. "Let them choose what kind of leadership they want, not based on party lines, but based on truth." And with that, he gestured toward the side entrance. What happened next would leave the studio absolutely stunned. And it wasn't a joke, a punchline, or even a debate point. It was a walkout. Tomi Lahren stared at him, stunned. For a moment it wasn't clear if she would retaliate or retreat. But something in the way Colbert held her gaze, resolute, unshaken, seemed to unnerve her. The cameras were still rolling. The audience held their breath. And in a move that would dominate headlines for days, Lahren turned and walked off the stage without a word. Gasps rippled through the studio. The silence that followed felt like the eye of a storm. Colbert didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply returned to his seat, adjusted his blazer, and looked directly into the camera. "You can leave the stage," he said quietly, "but you cannot walk away from what this country is becoming." Social media exploded within seconds. Clips of the moment were already flooding Twitter and Instagram. Some praised Colbert's composure. Others slammed him for turning entertainment into activism. But one thing was undeniable. Something rare had happened. A late-night show had abandoned its usual rhythm and peeled back the curtain on a deeper truth. Backstage, Lahren's team scrambled to control the narrative. Phones buzzed as producers debated whether to issue a statement. Meanwhile, Colbert's crew looked to him for direction. He gave a simple nod. No edits, no cuts. The show would air exactly as it happened, but the night wasn't over. As the show neared its closing minutes, Colbert looked down at his notes, then pushed them aside again. "There's no going back to monologues tonight," he said. "Not after this." He turned again to the camera. "There's a reason this struck a nerve. We are not debating tax policy or immigration law. We are debating character. We are living in a time where truth is bent, trust is shattered, and leaders, if we can call them that, don't even try to hide their contempt for decency anymore. And somehow, we've made that acceptable." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "I don't care if you're left or right. I care if you're awake. Awake enough to see that this isn't politics. It's a slow, deliberate unraveling of integrity. And if we keep laughing our way through it, we'll wake up one day and realize we handed away our standards for a few cheap wins." The audience began to applaud, not wildly but steadily, respectfully. It wasn't the applause of entertainment. It was the kind of response usually reserved for eulogies or truth-telling sermons. Something deeper had been triggered. But as the applause grew, another unexpected shift occurred. From the front row, an audience member stood up, then another. Soon, a dozen people were on their feet, not cheering but simply standing in silence. A quiet gesture of support, not for a performer, but for the message. Backstage, the network director was in a panic. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It was an open wound on national television. Producers called in, unsure how to close the segment, but Colbert made the decision for them. "Don't roll credits yet," he said off camera. Then, addressing the audience once more, he added, "There's a risk in saying these things. I know that. I may lose viewers. I may face backlash. But if the cost of keeping this seat is silence, then maybe I don't want the seat anymore." The crowd roared, not with laughter but with something closer to resolve. For once it wasn't about applause lines. It was about drawing a line in the sand. As the energy reached its height, Colbert looked directly into the camera and issued a challenge. "Tonight you heard from me. Tomorrow I hope to hear from you. Speak up. Not on social media. Speak in your communities, your workplaces, your homes. Ask the hard questions. Call out the easy lies. And above all, do not confuse volume for values." Then, as if by instinct, The screen faded to black. Not with credits, not with music, but with a silence that said more than any words could. But just as the broadcast ended, and viewers thought it was over, something unexpected leaked from the studio. A hot mic captured a behind-the-scenes exchange, one that would light a fire under an already smoldering political moment. A well-known producer, caught off guard by the emotional weight of the moment, muttered, "This could cost us everything?" And Colbert's quiet reply, "Then it's worth everything." News outlets erupted the following morning. Headlines across every major network and social platform blared with reactions. Colbert breaks format with blistering monologue. Tomi Lahren walks off set after fiery exchange. Late night no longer safe. Colbert puts nation on notice. The footage had already gone viral, dissected in real time by pundits, commentators, and social media influencers from every political shade imaginable. Yet behind all the analysis, the core moment remained untouched, raw, jarring, and unfiltered. Millions had witnessed something that went beyond entertainment. Colbert had not just criticized a fellow commentator or defended his beliefs. He had held up a mirror to the nation and refused to let the reflection blink. In the days that followed, the late-night landscape shifted. Other hosts, feeling the ripple, began revisiting their own scripts. Producers held tense meetings about how much was too much when it came to political content. But no one could ignore what Colbert had pulled off. He had raised the bar by obliterating it. Meanwhile, Tomi Lahren went on a media spree, painting herself as the victim of an ambush and accusing Colbert of creating a hostile, biased environment. It was meant to be a friendly debate, she told one morning show, but clearly the only viewpoint welcome on that stage was his. Her supporters rallied behind her, flooding online comment sections and message boards with outrage. But Colbert remained silent. For nearly a week, he said nothing. No press releases, no interviews, no attempts to reclaim the narrative. That silence only amplified speculation. Had he gone too far? Had he been reprimanded? Was this a strategic move or genuine disillusionment? Then came the next live show. The studio buzzed with anticipation. There were no advanced promos, no teasers, only the words "Stephen returns" in stark white on black. When Colbert finally walked onto the stage, he wasn't met with his usual standing ovation. Instead, the audience sat silently, unsure of what tone the evening would take. Would he double down? Would he apologize? He approached the desk but didn't sit. Instead, he stood in front of it, both hands resting on the wood as if grounding himself. "You've seen the footage," he began. "You've heard the talking heads. I've heard the noise too. Some said I was brave. Others said I crossed a line. But you know what no one said?" He leaned in slightly. "No one has said I was wrong." The tension snapped like a rope. Applause thundered, this time not just for the man, but for the defiance, the refusal to soften truth into palatable sound bites. He raised a hand, calming the room. "This isn't about winning a debate. It's not even about politics. It's about the fact that we, as a culture, have allowed contradiction to replace conviction. We reward performance over principle. And when someone breaks script, it terrifies us. That fear? That's the signal we're getting close to something real." Colbert paused, then continued in a quieter tone. "I'm not a perfect man. I've made mistakes. I've dodged hard moments in the past, but what happened last week wasn't one of those moments. It was clarity." From that point forward, the episode unfolded less like a talk show and more like a reckoning. Colbert shared letters, some furious, some grateful. He read tweets from critics and defenders alike. But then, he did something unprecedented. He invited Tomi Lahren back on the show. The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. A live invitation, no PR spin, no handlers involved. Just an open chair and an opportunity. "I am not interested in silencing anyone," Colbert said. I am interested in whether we can speak plainly in a country built on plain-spoken truth. Producers balked. Executives sent rapid emails. But Colbert held firm. The next week's slot was reserved. Then, in a final twist, Colbert revealed something that had gone unnoticed in the original footage. A camera angle never aired. In it, as Tomi walked off stage, she could be seen briefly pausing just beyond the curtain. Watching. Listening. Was she really done with the conversation? Colbert asked. Or was she hoping someone would ask her to stay? The crowd was silent again. Not stunned, not confused, but contemplative. Was America walking off the stage too soon, eager to silence discomfort instead of lean into it? Could two ideological opposites actually share a space without the need for spectacle or retreat? And when the camera cuts, who's still listening behind the curtain? The seat was waiting, and so was the country. The night of the return arrived like a storm building on the horizon. Quiet at first, then unmistakably electric. Every media outlet, every podcast, every blog had latched onto it. Tomi Lahren was coming back, and not to shout from a safe distance, but to sit across from the very man who had unraveled her public persona just a week before. The audience in the studio was unlike any other. People had flown in from different states. Some were long-time Colbert fans. Others, vocal supporters of Tomi Lahren. And between them sat a tension as sharp as glass. No one knew what to expect. The set was bathed in softer lighting than usual. Colbert walked out without music, without jokes, without the usual cheer. He welcomed the crowd with a nod, then turned to the camera. "There are few moments in television that aren't designed," he said. "But what happens tonight will be one of them." When Tomi stepped out, the room froze. She wore black. No flash, no sparkle. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked to her seat and looked Colbert in the eye, and for a full 5 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Colbert gestured gently. "Why did you come back?" Tomi didn't hesitate. "Because you didn't shut me down, Stephen. You challenged me. And I don't run from that." The crowd exhaled. The conversation began with clipped civility, each carefully choosing words. But quickly, as the formality faded, they slid into something unexpected. Candor. Tomi admitted she had never anticipated being asked back. She had assumed Colbert's invitation was performative. But when she watched the unaired camera angle, when she saw herself pause behind the curtain, she realized something. She had not been silenced. She had walked away. "Maybe I wanted someone to stop me," she said. "Maybe I didn't want to be the one who gave up," Colbert nodded. "And maybe I didn't want to be the host who let someone leave before the conversation was finished." Then came the reckoning. They debated Trump. Again. But this time it wasn't a shouting match. They argued character, not caricature. Tomi defended his policy legacy: lower unemployment, hardline stances on China, reshaping of the judiciary. But Colbert pressed her. At what cost? "Do ends justify the means?" he asked. "And if they do, then what happens to truth in the process?" Tomi's response was quieter than expected. "I'm not here to say the man is perfect. I'm saying a lot of Americans felt seen for the first time, even if it meant ignoring what we didn't want to see." And there it was. Vulnerability. Not from an opponent, but a citizen. Colbert leaned forward. "Do you think feeling seen is worth excusing everything else?" "I don't know," she said. "But I think pretending half the country's opinion doesn't exist is worse." The audience was silent. Then, slowly, applause broke. Not for either one, but for the moment. Two people, diametrically opposed, had stared across the chasm and built a bridge from words. The episode ended not with a final statement but a final question. Colbert looked at the camera, his voice softer now. "If this conversation mattered more than the debate last week, What does that say about how we treat disagreement in this country? He stood, Tomi beside him, and the crowd rose, not in celebration, but in recognition. Something rare had happened. Not victory, but understanding. The internet exploded once more. Clips went viral, hashtags trended. But this time, the noise wasn't about destruction. It was about what could happen when destruction is paused, just long enough for dialogue to grow. Tomi and Colbert didn't agree by the end, but they had listened, responded, and resisted the cheap comfort of applause lines. And maybe that was the true triumph, not the silencing of one voice, but the daring act of letting both be heard. In an age where opinions are currency and outrage, two public figures did the unthinkable. They had a conversation, and the nation, stunned and silent, stayed to listen.